Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that your body can actually be either a sugar burner or a fat burner? On this podcast, we talk all about how to make your body a fat-burning, fat-fueled machine and engaging your full metabolic flexibility. I'm Vanessa Spina. I am a sport nutrition specialist, a biomedical science student at U of T, and I am the author of the best-selling cookbook Keto Essentials, available on Amazon, and creator of the Ketogenic Girl Challenge program. And I am obsessed with optimizing our health through all these different biohacks, ketogenesis, intermittent fasting, all of these amazing tools that center around making the body a fat-adapted, fat-fueled machine. With this in mind, I present interviews to you with biomedical scientists, physicians, and people from all around the world who have experienced remarkable results from following a low-carb or ketogenic diet and getting their body into ketogenesis. So I hope you guys enjoyed these interviews with this goal in mind. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Fast Keto. It is Thursday, March 4th. I can't believe it's March. I'm so excited for today's episode. We're going to talk all about intuitive eating for former food addicts, because I think that intuitive eating has gained a lot of popularity in the last few years, but it's really not being talked about from a perspective of someone who's ever dealt with food addiction, with binging, with struggling at all with food, because it's very, very important to understand certain things about food and how certain foods and food products affect our brains and release levels of dopamine that are so high that it creates this addictive cycle that's very hard to break out of. And if you're anyone who is in this community who's experienced food addiction, a lot of us have, myself included, you may have possibly found food freedom or food peace through doing keto or carnivore. And if you've ever tasted food freedom or food peace for real, which is a sense of not thinking about food throughout the whole day except for when you're hungry for a meal, you know how incredible it is to actually experience that. If you've never experienced it, I want you to experience it. We'll talk a bit about that. But today's episode is all about how to learn intuitive eating for food addicts, in my opinion, sharing a little bit of my experience and how I was able to get to a point of intuitive eating. But I think it's different, and I think it's special for people who have ever dealt with any kind of food addiction or binging and purging, any kind of issues surrounding preoccupation with food. So we're going to talk all about that on today's episode. You guys know that I am a huge data nerd, and I absolutely love using technology to get feedback and insight on my blood sugar, on my ketones, on my heart rate, so many different amazing tools. One of the tools I've used that's been the most insightful has been a continuous glucose monitor. You may have heard of a CGM in the past few years. They've been gaining in popularity. It's basically a device that you wear, and it gives you real-time feedback any time of the day, at any point before a meal, before exercise. You can check what your blood sugar is doing. And for me, wearing a device like this was so insightful into learning how my body actually responds to foods without having to prick my finger all day long. I was able to just use it, know that it was on, and any time throughout the day, I could just check and see what my blood glucose was doing. And also I could track trends and see how exercise and different meals were impacting my blood sugar. Now, one of the best ones that I recommend is by NutriSense. You can get it directly by going to their website, and they also have one of the best app experiences for tracking blood sugar data and things like meals, ketone measurements, and even stress events in your life. Only NutriSense pairs every user with a registered dietitian who's been trained to read metabolic data and make really wise, insightful suggestions. NutriSense helps people use this technology more successfully to meet your health and fitness goals. Now, one of the things they're all about is listening to your body with technology, because we all have unique and different reactions to different foods, different macronutrients, exercise, and just life. And it's really important to know what habits and go-to meals are really optimal for you, and wearing a CGM from NutriSense can really help with this. So if you go and try them out, there is a discount code for listeners of Fast Keto. It is Ketogenic Girl, and if you go to nutrisense.io and sign up, you will receive $25 off any of your first month of trying out NutriSense. Again, the code for that is Ketogenic Girl, all one word, and the website is nutrisense.io. Go and check it out. Let me know your feedback, your data, your insights. I would absolutely love to hear how you're doing with it. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to be here with you today. Oh my goodness. It's spring. It's the start of spring. I just got to go for a little walk after being at the dentist. So I hope I sound okay to you guys because part of my face was frozen this morning. I had to get a former cavity from years ago that was kind of needing replacement. I had to have it filled and replaced and drilled and all that lovely stuff that you get to do at the dentist. I'm lucky I have an amazing dentist here in Prague that I love, and they just have incredible technology. They use these amazing microscopes, and she put a ton of Novocaine in my mouth, so I didn't feel any pain at all, and it was done in like 45 minutes, which is awesome. But the reason I mention that is while this was happening, I knew that this was going to be the topic for this week's solo cast, but this cavity came from my former life. It came from my life when I was a sugar addict, a food addict. And I always say the two together because I was a food addict because I was a sugar addict. Because when you understand the biochemistry of food and you understand that carbohydrates or refined carbs are just sugars, they're called starches, and we refer to them, as carbs. But it's all just broken down into one single molecule, which is glucose. So I always talk about how starches are like Christmas tree lights, and every light on that chain is a unit or molecule of glucose. And so starches that we call carbs, like if you're eating pasta or rice or potato chips, nachos, whatever it is, corn, anything from the carb family, you're eating starches that are basically these long chains of glucose. You're eating a form of sugar, which I refer to as glucose. But I want to talk about intuitive eating and food freedom and food peace, because for someone who was a former food addict and sugar addict, finding food freedom and food peace has been one of the most amazing parts of my journey, one of the most rewarding parts of this journey. And I love helping other people find that too, because if you've ever dealt with food addiction, you know what it's like to be constantly preoccupied with food, to be thinking about lunch while you're eating breakfast, or thinking about your snack while you're eating lunch, and to be browsing food pages, looking at food on Yelp, looking up restaurant menus. To go from that to where I am now, where I only think about food right before it's time to eat. If I'm invited to a restaurant with friends, I don't even look at the menu before we go, because I know that I'm going to find something great there. I'm going to find either like some kind of protein like steak or chicken or fish, and I'm going to pair it either with some butter or with some grilled vegetables. And that's it, with a side salad maybe. I know that I'm going to be able to find something I can eat anywhere, because every restaurant has protein, and most restaurants have like butter or side salads or things. I don't even worry about it anymore. And it used to be such a source of preoccupation for me that I would get anxiety when people would invite me to restaurants, and then I would, especially if it was like an Italian place or a place that had a lot of grain-based dishes, carb-based dishes, and which people love, so they're super popular. And then I would have to go and look at the menu and see, is there anything I can find on there? Is it, oh, poor me, as such a victim? Like, is there anything I can find on there? And I used to do this as a vegetarian, which doubled it up because I was a food addict and a vegetarian and doing high carb. So I was always also checking the menu back then to see if there was some dish that I could find that would suit my vegetarian needs or vegan needs or raw fruitarian needs. But I used to be very, very, very preoccupied with food to the point that it took so much of my energy every day, energy that I now spend in so many more creative, more rewarding ways. And it took me a long time to get there. But as a food addict, I had to take a very specific path. So if you're interested in learning more about food and sugar addiction, I have several episodes of the podcast about this. One of my favorites I just uploaded for the first time to YouTube last week, and it's with Dr. Vera Tarman. She's the author of Food Junkies, which is an excellent book. I really recommend you pick up if you're interested in food addiction at all. But she talks about some amazing science, and understanding this really helped me to be able to understand what was happening to me when I ate these foods. So we're programmed to enjoy activities with releases of dopamine, and natural healthy activities, going for a walk, bonding with a friend or making a new friend, doing a class or an activity or yoga, something that you love, making love with your partner, playing an instrument, singing. There's our reading or writing, which are two huge ones of mine, laying on the beach in the sun. All of these activities are really healthy activities where we release, say, somewhere between 0 to 50, 100, up to 200 units of dopamine. There are certain things that make us override that and release way more. So Class A drugs will do that. Certain foods can actually do this. And Dr. Vera Tarman found that certain foods, including a lot of foods laced with sugar, they actually release so much dopamine that it creates a dependence, because the levels of dopamine go so high that when they come down, you then get into this, like they talk about the very first hit is the highest you'll ever go. And then afterwards, you actually have to engage in that activity or do that drug or eat that food just to feel normal. After a while, you don't even get a high from it. You just have to have it to feel normal, to get your normal levels of dopamine back, because the surges then deplete you of those healthy neurotransmitters that we need to feel good. So you start to feel bad in a day if you don't have that. And this happens with so many different addictive things in our world, like online pornography. I know a lot of people deal with this. I did an amazing episode with Matthew Cruz, who talked all about how he was able to heal his online pornography addiction, because when he went carnivore, it helped regulate his levels of dopamine, and he no longer had this intense need that would go from, it went from like a 10 out of 10 to like a 2 something at a level where he could say, I'm having an urge to do this, but I'm not going to because I feel better about myself when I don't. He could take control of it. And that's what we want to do with addictions, is take control of them, have power over them. We want to sit in that seat of power so we have power over these things. So if we talk about food in terms of, its contents having sugar in it, being highly processed, being quote unquote highly palatable foods, the food industry knows that these foods are addictive and that they release so much dopamine that we then become addicted to them. And this is why you start out having 1 can of soda and then you end up having 10 in a day. And this happens to people all the time, or why you enjoy potato chips or some, nacho chips sometime, and then you have to have them every day, or candy. Candy was my biggest thing when I was growing up. I literally had to have candy just to get through the day. I always had to have some kind of candy on me as a child. And it's because, and I used to look at it and think, I was using candy to feel good I was using it. I was the user. I was the bad one. But these foods were using me. As a child, I can only imagine that we're even more sensitive to these things. And so the first time that I had, for example, Nerds candy or Runts or all these hard candies that I loved, or Kool-Aid, is really, really sugary substances, Hubba Bubba gum, like Fun Dip, all of this stuff I was obsessed with. First times that I had them, I experienced such a high. But then after that, I had to have them just to feel normal. So I would be depressed or unhappy or have a difficult time dealing with my emotions if I didn't have them. And that's what happens with addictive substances. That is really so important to understand. And I want people to understand that this is why it's habit forming. It's why certain drugs are habit forming, certain activities, sex addiction, porn addiction, food addiction. It's because this pattern is established in our brains. And it's not you. You're not a miserable loser because you can't stop doing this behavior, or you can't stop eating this food, or you can't stop engaging in this activity. It's because of your brain, and that the one time you experienced it, your dopamine levels went so high that you now have to have it every day, or experience or do it every day just to feel normal. But then you start to feel like trash because you're doing this activity that makes you feel bad about yourself, and it can really affect your self-esteem, which makes dependence even harder to break. I know that food is not drugs, but food are not drugs, or, technically they're not drugs, they're not classified as drugs, but doctors such as Dr. Vera Tarman have done a lot of research and work to help us understand. And I've also had some other sugar addiction experts on the podcast. I think it was this time last year, I did a whole month just on sugar and food addiction. And they all said the same things, that these substances become addictive because of our neurochemistry and what happens in our brains. And we don't have to feel bad about ourselves for this happening. It is because of the power of these substances. Whereas when you engage in a healthy activity, such as, sex, or having delicious food, or enjoying an activity that you love, a flow activity, it releases enough dopamine that you enjoy it, but not so much that you have this crazy surge. And it's very similar to our blood sugar surges and how carbs can have this effect. You don't just have the dopamine surge. With food, it's almost double because you also have the blood sugar, the glucose surge. So your blood sugar goes really high when you eat anything with sugar or any carbs that are highly processed and refined. And your blood sugar goes up just like your dopamine to levels that your body then has to secrete so much insulin to get it back down again. And then as it's falling, you have a blood sugar crash and you feel awful, you feel hungry, and you can't stop thinking about food. And that's what happened to me. It started with sugar and candy as a kid. And then, it was any carbs I can get my hands on, whether it was bagels or chips or, any kind of junk food, which really isn't food. And this is one of the issues that I have with intuitive eating being proclaimed as the holy grail of having health. Okay, so how is intuitive eating being defined? It's defined as you have no rules, no restrictions. You can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. And I think that may be great for people who have not experienced food addiction or binging and purging or any kind of issues around food. If you have ever experienced food addiction, and some people are more susceptible to having these surges of dopamine. If you've had food addiction or you've dealt with sugar highs and lows from candy or from carbohydrates, and you're more sensitive to them, then you're not ever going to be able to do intuitive eating in a way that includes sugar and processed and refined foods like junk foods, because you're always going to be triggered in the same way. Your biochemistry is always going to be triggered in that same way. And so to attempt to do intuitive eating like everyone else is doing it, like, oh, intuitive eating. I heard this expert nutritionist on E! News this morning talking about how, you decide in the morning you feel like having a donut, and then you have that donut, but just recognize that you're going to have a blood sugar surge and a crash afterwards, and then you're going to be hungry after, so you should eat some protein. That may work for someone who doesn't have food addiction, but I'm sorry, this does not work for anyone who's ever had their biochemistry manipulated, their neurochemistry manipulated by refined and processed foods. This episode is made possible by one of my favorite companies, ButcherBox. I absolutely love this company. The difference in the quality of their meat when compared to the grocery store, the convenience of having delivery shipped right to your door, and how budget-friendly it is makes it one of my favorite services out there. Now, some of the things I love about them is they have delicious 100% grass-fed beef. So that means you're getting beef with the healthiest omega-3 to omega-6 profile. You are getting free-range organic chicken, heritage breed pork, and wild-caught seafood. It's really unbeatable value because the average cost works out to less than $6 per meal. I love how flexible it is. They have so many different box options and delivery frequencies to fit your needs, and you can cancel anytime with no penalties. It's so convenient because you get great tasting meat that you can feel really good about, delivered right to your door with free shipping. I really think caring about animals and our planet, improving the livelihoods for farmers, and having better meals enjoyed together makes such a difference. ButcherBox sources from ranchers and fishers who meet the highest standards for quality. You get to choose your box and your delivery frequency. They offer 5 different boxes, 4 curated box options, as well as their popular custom box, so you can get exactly what you and your family love. They ship your order frozen for freshness and packed in an eco-friendly 100% recyclable box, so you get to enjoy high-quality meat delivered directly to your door. And this saves you time, so you have more time for yourself, more time to have amazing meals together as a family. Right now, if you sign up as a new customer in the month of March, you will receive ground beef for life. That is free ground beef in every order that you place with ButcherBox. So go and sign up and take advantage of this amazing offer and receive free ground beef for life. It's one of my favorite promotions that they do, and it is an amazing time to sign up. I think a lot of people experience these highs, not only with dopamine, but also with their blood sugar. And to recommend intuitive eating as a blanket cure for everyone is, I think, irresponsible, because people who have had their neurochemistry or their biochemistry hijacked by these foods and have become food addicts, they can't just have a little bit of sugar here. And I see this all the time too in eating disorder recovery, where people are just encouraged to eat all of these carby foods. And you see it in food served in hospitals too. And these are not health foods. I mean, these are food products. They're barely even food. Sugar to me is not a food. It might be classified as that because it provides energy, but it's a substance. Sugar to me is a substance, and that's why it can be abused like other substances. And these products that are referred to as food are not real food. A real food is a food that has a single ingredient on its label, which means it doesn't need a nutrition label. So if you're looking at a steak, that's a whole real food. It doesn't need a nutrition label to tell you what's in it, and it shouldn't have any ingredients in it. The same goes for eggs or chicken or yogurt. It should just be basically one thing. Maybe the label on a yogurt will explain that it's been pasteurized or something, but for the most part, if it's got more than one ingredient, it's been processed in some way. That's not always bad. Some foods like yogurt have some processing, like cheese as well. But for the most part, you know what's in it. You could probably count the ingredients on less than a few fingers. And that really to me is a definition of what food is. And the fact that we have to classify it and say whole foods and always remind people, like every time I talk about nutrient density and about keto and everything, it's always, well, you have to eat real foods, and that means whole foods, which are single ingredient foods. But to me, that's just food. That's just what food is. All the other stuff isn't food. Like the 90% of the stuff in the supermarket that's squeezed between the produce aisle and the meat and dairy and eggs, it's all just some kind of product that someone has created that probably has a reward pathway and makes people very addicted to it, or it's a sugary drink that has a similar effect. When I was home in Colorado, I couldn't believe in the grocery stores there. I mean, they're absolutely massive. Some of them that we went to are just like warehouses. And most of the aisles, like some of the aisles, you'll have 2 aisles that are just drinks. And it's just a different delivery device for sugar with every kind of flavor or fizz or caffeine or stimulant added to it. The same goes for the ice cream aisles, like basically all the aisles in between the two, the ones that all are on the perimeter, it's just like produce, meat, cheese, eggs, dairy, like all the real foods. And then in between is just like the majority of the contents there. It's just all these food products. And, I think we need to really acknowledge that these are not food. They're food products. And there's a huge difference. And we need, in order to be optimally healthy, to be centering our diet around real foods, or just food, basically. If you're someone who comes from sugar or food addiction, intuitive eating is still accessible to you. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I achieved it doing keto and carnivore. So people talk about how intuitive eating, the beauty of it is that you have no restriction. But a restriction is important, especially if we want to live optimally and we want to live well. There's certain things that we restrict ourselves from every day that just keeps us alive. We restrict ourselves from riding in cars without a seatbelt. That keeps us alive. We restrict ourselves from drinking poison or chemicals. We restrict ourselves from walking, across a highway in busy traffic. These are all restrictions. Does that mean that we're not free? Well, you're free to drink poison or run across train tracks, but does that mean you want to do that? So restriction is always phrased as a negative thing. And yet, what if restriction is what is keeping us alive? It's keeping us healthy. It's keeping us safe. That's important. And I think that when it comes to food, we need to also look at it the same way. Whereas just because there is some kind of restriction, it doesn't mean that there is this implied lack of freedom. For me, I was actually able to find food freedom and food peace the most when I did the carnivore diet. When I did the carnivore diet, I used it as a way to reconnect with intuitive eating in this framework as a former food addict, because intuitive eating was very obtainable and achievable for me when foods are just real whole foods. There's no sweeteners. There's no stimulants. Except for caffeine, I have to acknowledge I do have coffee, but there's no added products or chemicals. Everything that I ate on carnivore is basically just single ingredient foods, most of it being animal foods, meat and fish and eggs and dairy. All of these are natural whole foods found in nature. And the removal of everything, because in the keto space, I think this is also very achievable. However, there's a lot of gray area in the keto space where there's a lot of foods that are, convenience, products that are made for us that have keto macros, but they may be processed and refined. And for a food addict or sugar addict, it could create this similar, dopamine reactions because it mimics a lot of that processed and refined food. Just because it fits the keto macros doesn't mean that it's a health food. So, my approach to keto has always been focusing on whole foods, on single ingredient foods, and making sure that everything I'm eating is real. And with carnivore, it's the easiest way to do that. If you want to experience food freedom and you haven't tried carnivore yet, you'll experience, if you've had any kind of food addiction or sugar addiction in the past, you will experience what it is like to just eat when you're hungry and to have zero interest in food outside of meal times. And that's how it's meant to be. We are not supposed to be thinking about food, being preoccupied with food, or any of that outside of meal times. There is absolutely no evolutionary benefit or benefit to our quality of life. It's the opposite of that. To be preoccupied and enslaved with food, with the idea of food, is total slavery. That's the opposite of freedom. So to me, I was able to find freedom in doing carnivore diet or doing keto with more of a carnivore style approach without the foods that can mimic those responses. Over time, this also helped me to be able to heal and be able to moderate foods that I wasn't able to moderate before, like dairy. Especially, I wasn't always able to moderate it very well before. Now, after doing those couple of years of carnivore and doing a sort of keto carnivore approach, I find that I'm very much able to just have a few slices of cheese or a serving of yogurt and I'm totally fine. I don't overdo it. I don't go overboard, whereas I didn't really have control with those foods before. I was also able to quit dark chocolate completely. I don't even think about it anymore, whereas before I ate those, I had a little bit of dark chocolate every day, and it was like my happiness at the end of the day. And now I realize how ridiculous that is, because my happiness comes from doing things that I love with people that I love, connecting with people that I love, doing a puzzle with Pete, going for a walk with myself or with a friend, or calling a friend while I'm on a walk, reading or writing, or just doing activities that I enjoy in nature. Spending time outside in the sun. These are all activities that bring me happiness. It's not dark chocolate. And part of that, which I always talk about, is I took this amazing magnesium supplement from our show sponsor, Optimizers, their Magnesium Breakthrough. I take it every single day. It's one of the only supplements that I take every single day. And it really, really helped me to eliminate the cravings that I had for dark chocolate. And I think that it was that combined with all the work of doing carnivore and eliminating everything but real foods, really stripping it down to just real food. So I truly think that intuitive eating is possible. One of the secrets that I learned is that if you're a former food or sugar addict, when you do carnivore, it's effortless. You eat as much meat, fish, or animal products, eggs or dairy, as you feel you would like to have, but you keep that food relatively plain and similar to how it is just on its own. So, you're not adding all of these extra flavorings and sauces. And I'm talking about like more like barbecue sauce, ketchup, like those things that they add that hyper palatability, adding more savory things. You'll shift your palate towards a more savory one, and making sure that you're getting the optimal amount of protein for you every day is a huge factor in satiety and overcoming food addiction. Because once you've had enough protein, which I think is the macronutrient that truly contributes to satiety the most, because it has so many of the essential amino acids that we cannot synthesize on our own, we have to get from food. Once we hit that optimal or ideal amount of protein for ourselves, then preoccupation or thoughts of food really go, like they become virtually non-existent. And that's the experience that I had. I think it can also be done with doing like a really clean sort of keto carnivore approach. Like I was doing ketogenic carnivore in the fall. I love that. Like I found it extremely satiating. Higher protein tends to be more satiating for me personally, but I think you have to find out for yourself which one is by testing both. And I was really able to experience that food freedom as a former food and sugar addict. And now I've been doing more of a keto carnivore approach again, just adding a little bit more variety in with some, low starch vegetables and fruit. And I'm really able to moderate that. There was a point where I wasn't even able to moderate salads. Like I was always eating these massive salads just to have all this dressing. But now that my satiety is really the prime focus in making sure that I get all the meat, and the salad or whatever vegetable side that I have, it's sort of an afterthought. It's just a complement to the main food, which is the protein and fat that I'm making sure to get, because, we need these essential proteins, essential amino acids and essential fatty acids from our diet. We don't need carbs from our diet or sugar from our diet because our body just makes it on demand anytime we need it. So it's so vital for us that it's not essential, because we can't survive without glucose. Our bodies make it for us. But because they're so good at making it for us from all these different substrates, from lactate, from pyruvate, from amino acids, from so many different materials, even our own fat tissue has a glycerol backbone for every 3 triglycerides on it. So we're able to make glucose from all these different substrates. And for that reason, glucose is non-essential. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, because we have to be able to make it for our brain to survive. But our brain can also thrive with less external glucose coming in, so that we can make more ketones from our own stored body fat and utilize those. So if you have never experienced food freedom and you haven't tried carnivore, I definitely think that it's something that really helped me get to that point. Doing any kind of like reverse diet, I talked about that in last week's solo cast, as a way to reset hunger levels or reset food addiction or reset your metabolism, can be really helpful too. I created my carnivore meal plans and been working on the reverse diet meal plans, which are really close to being done, because these approaches were so helpful for me. And I just want everyone out there who's ever suffered from being a food addict, being a sugar addict, feeling terrible about yourself, or if there's other addictions that you have in life that you're dealing with and you're feeling shame around that, know and understand that it's not your fault. These substances, these activities, they create such high levels of dopamine that it hijacks our neurobiology to the point where we become dependent within one use of that substance or activity just to feel normal. And you only really get high off the first time. After that, you just use it to feel your normal self because of this downregulation in dopamine receptors that occurs. So just know that. Don't feel shame. You are not a shameful person. You're not a bad person if you deal with any addictions. You are a victim of this hijacking of your own neurobiology, of your own biochemistry. And just know and understand that, because it can be so detrimental to carry shame and to feel bad about yourself because you are a victim of these things without understanding why and how we become victims of these substances in our environment. And that, there are things that hijack our dopamine. There are things we can do to basically restore dopamine levels to normal and sort of dopamine fast in a way. And I think that so many people have found that through doing carnivore, through doing keto, through eliminating all these processed foods, all these foods with sugar, all these highly carby foods, you can reset your dopamine so that you are no longer a slave to these substances to feel like your normal self. And the same thing goes for any activities or any, behavior that's controlling you. If you feel like you are not in power, you feel like you are not in control, and you feel bad about yourself, please understand it's just the way that our biochemistry works. And you're not a bad person. You are a wonderful person, and God loves you. And, don't feel bad about yourself. Don't feel shame, because there's just so much shame in our culture, and we see it perpetuated all the time by people shaming others all the time. They're projecting shame, and there's this toxic shame. And really, I think the best way to end that and put an end to these cycles of shaming and shame is to release it in ourselves. If we are able to let go of our own shame, we won't shame other people, and other people won't shame us, and we can break, these toxic cycles of shame. And, just understanding your biology and your physiology, if it can help you clue into that and maybe let go and release that for yourself, love yourself and know that you're a good and worthy person. You're worthy of love. You are enough. I love you. I'm so happy that you were able to be here with me today. I hope that I got to keep you company on your walk, on your commute, while you're doing errands, whatever you're doing. As always, I love when you guys tag me and let me know how you're listening, if you're listening, where you're listening from. All of that is so, so much fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It's obviously a topic that I feel quite strongly about, quite passionately about, because I don't like to see people suffering or feeling ashamed of themselves. And I hope that maybe this helped you to understand or shift something within you. If you know anyone that you think might help to hear these words, please share it with them as well, because I think it's so important for us to understand all of these scientific facts about our bodies and our minds and how they can so easily become hijacked. So thank you guys for listening. As I mentioned earlier, I do have carnivore meal plans, reverse diet meal plans based on what worked for me, what helped me attain all of this food freedom. And, I made them, like I said, because it helped me so much. So I would absolutely love to have you join all of the meal plans at ketogenicgirl.com. That's www.ketogenicgirl.com. And they all come with membership in my coaching group for support to answer any questions that you have as you go along. And I would love to hear from you if you have any questions about the programs. I'd be more than happy to answer them. So let me know your feedback on the episode. I love hearing your takeaways, your insights. If you enjoy the topic, you want me to talk more about it, I love hearing from you guys. So I'm sending you all so much love on this beautiful Thursday. Start to March, start to my favorite season of the year, spring. I am so excited, and it is International Women's Day and your just Truly's birthday on Monday. I'm really excited for that too. It's going to be fun. A lot of people that I love have birthdays coming up this month, so it's kind of a fun time. But I love you guys. Thanks for listening. And until the next episode, I'm wishing you a fat-filled rest of your day. Thanks for being here. Bye for now. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.